Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining today's special launch of our new Kindergarten Matters webinar series. Many of you may have joined us for our Kindergarten as a Sturdy Bridge webinar series, sponsored in partnership with New America last year. Through those 8 webinars, CGLR emphasized the importance of kindergarten as a sturdy bridge to the early grades of elementary school. Across the series, we hosted multiple sessions which explored literacy, math, and social-emotional development in kindergarten, and discussed how educators, districts, and states can play a part in transforming kindergarten. With more than 1,400 unduplicated attendees across the series, we thank you for your participation, and we're excited to have you join us again. In continuation of our previous discussions, we're hoping to use this new Kindergarten Matters series as an opportunity to spotlight the significance of this foundational stage in a child's education and provide a platform to share data-based research, real-world successes and challenges, and actionable insights. We'll also be focusing on recognizing and responding to the diverse needs of every child, with special emphasis on children who are often overlooked and who face additional challenges, such as emergent bilingual students. Which brings us to today. The Campaign for Grade Level Reading is so excited to host the inaugural session of our Kindergarten Matters webinar series with emergent bilinguals and English language learners, the Sturdy Bridge Opportunity. Bilingual learners in the American education system represent a diverse and vital demographic, contributing to the rich tapestry of our classrooms. Navigating the challenges of acquiring proficiency in multiple languages, this rapidly growing population of students brings unique cultural perspectives and linguistic skills to the educational landscape. They also face distinct hurdles, as revealed in a 2022 study that found that students who remain classified as English learners after 5 years face heightened risks of negative academic outcomes, including lower test scores, an increased likelihood of dropping out of high school, and lower on-time high school graduation rates. Considering this, support for emergent bilingual kindergartners is paramount. Today, we're excited to bring you the voices and experiences of leaders in the field who have been acting to strengthen supports given to emergent bilinguals in kindergarten and across the early grade continuum. And now I am honored to welcome and briefly introduce our esteemed panelists with us today in alphabetical order. Please note that full bios are linked in the chat, so I'm just providing a preview of who we have with us today. Melissa Castillo serves as the Senior Advisor for the Office of the Secretary at the U.S. Department of Education. Before taking on this role, she served as the Associate Superintendent of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion for the Arizona Department of Education, responsible for advancing educational opportunities and outcomes for diverse student populations. Dr. Castillo co-authored the book Language and Literacy for ELLs, Creating Systematic Change for Academic Achievement. Anya Hurwitz is the Executive Director of SEAL, Sobrato Early Academic Language, an educational nonprofit working to ensure all English learners and dual language learners in California learn, thrive, and lead. She has worked for over 25 years in education as a teacher, school leader, district administrator, and within the educational nonprofit sector. Chantel Meek is a professor of practice and the founding director of the Children's Equity Project at Arizona State University. Prior to founding the CEP, Dr. Meek worked as a senior policy advisor for early childhood at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the White House Domestic Policy Council during the Obama administration. Lydia Acosta-Stevens is the Executive Director of Multilingual and Multicultural Education with the Los Angeles Unified School District. In her role, Lydia serves over 200,000 students, each with individual needs and unique pathways to academic success. Before her role as executive director, Lydia was a school principal and helped enact the first successful district model of full-day kindergarten in 2004. And today's discussion will be moderated by Carla Ruiz. Carla is a senior program officer in the English Learner program at Sobrato Philanthropies, where she helps advance the program's grant-making and strategy. Based in Los Angeles, Carla manages the initiative's regional strategy, which aims to embed multilingual student and family voice into state and local policy. Carla, I'm excited to pass it off to you to get the conversation started.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Sierra, and it's great to be with you all today. And special thank you to the CGLR team for the invitation and organizing this conversation. I had the privilege to join the funder panel on the Sturdy Bridge last year, and it's so great to be able to expand on that with this set of experts today. So a little bit about Sobrato Philanthropies. We work to center multilingual learners through policy and systems change in PK-12 grades in California, where our multilingual learners make up 60% of children 0 to 5 entering our school systems. And through that work, it's become really clear how important it is in this moment where so much is happening in education to leverage kinder as that sturdy bridge between early learning, where developmental, culturally responsive practices, family engagement are really core, and the later grades. And like many of you on this call, we recognize it's a critical moment of transition, particularly for our underserved populations, like our emerging bilingual students, who bring really rich linguistic assets to our classrooms, yet are consistently falling behind, as Sierra mentioned, behind their English dominant peers later down the road. And so I will start there. And so to ground us in the importance of acknowledging our English learners and emergent bilinguals in the early elementary years, I want to turn it to Melissa and speak a little bit about your why and how you're lifting the voices of ELs and how the Secretary's Raise the Bar initiative relates to this moment.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you, everyone. I'd also like to give my thanks to CGLR for the invitation and the opportunity to be here with all of you and among such an esteemed group of experts in the field of English learners and multilingual learners. And so I'm really excited to speak with you a bit more in depth around the Secretary's priority of providing every student with a pathway to multilingualism and really creating pathways for global engagement. So Dr. Miguel Cardona really encourages us to foster a new multilingual generation of Americans strengthened by their identities, supported in their education, and prepared to lead our country around the world. And so on January 24th of last year, Dr. Cardona announced the department's Raise the Bar, Lead the World initiative, which includes 3 really important priorities: achieving academic excellence, boldly improving learning conditions, and creating pathways for global engagement. Under his achieving academic excellence priority are 2 big goals and objectives that we're focusing on. And the first one is accelerate learning. We want to ensure that students have the potential to reach much higher academically, that we know there's persistent gaps in opportunities and achievement for underserved students, and that as a result of the pandemic, those gaps have only grown larger. And so we really want to focus on academic excellence, and we know it's particularly urgent for our youngest learners. So we're really excited about reinforcing the kindergarten as a sturdy bridge work that's being done, and really punctuating the need to start early in a student's educational journey. And then his second goal area under Achieve Academic Excellence is to deliver a comprehensive and rigorous education for every student. So a comprehensive education provides students with rich learning opportunities across subject areas in welcoming environments with excellent instruction. And we know that this cannot be for only a chosen group of learners, but for all learners. Under his second priority, boldly improve learning conditions, we talk about eliminating the educator shortage for every school. And we really want to make sure that every student has access to outstanding and well-prepared, well-supported educators who reflect the diversity of their students. We also know that it's important to pay close attention to the shortage that is occurring with our leaders, with bus drivers, cafeteria workers, support staff, that the shortage in our educational systems is real, and we want to make sure that we're investing and paying attention to the need to address that shortage across all areas of the system. We also, under this particular priority, want to invest in every student's mental health and well-being. For students, we know to reach their full potential, we need to nurture their overall well-being. And we must also think about every adult in the school system and every adult that is there to address the needs of our students in school. And again, really putting an emphasis and punctuation on our youngest people in school. And then finally, when we look at his third priority area, create pathways for global engagement, we want to ensure every student has a pathway to college and/or career. And we want to do this by raising the bar for our students and to also improve opportunities for them upon graduation. Nicely tucked under our creating pathways for global engagement is also our goal area around providing every student with a pathway to multilingualism. As the Secretary has noted often, that being bilingual is a superpower, and that it's a superpower that provides our students with advantages in school and outside in a globally competitive and economic society. So if we move to the next slide. Sorry, I just lost, sorry. Technology, all right. So there are three key levers that we've identified to provide every student with a pathway to multilingualism. Our first key lever ensures that we prioritize centering our English learners and making sure that they have equitable access to language programs that recognize their language as an asset, that expands on their first language or heritage language, while also teaching them English, as well as provides them access to gifted programs, advanced placement programs, and CTE programs. We here at the department are continuing to develop resources, provide guidance and technical assistance that supports and ensures that the civil rights of our English learners are met. We know that if we do well here in centering our English learners, that pathway to multilingualism will be an easy one and a well-paved one. Our second lever focuses on the critical needs to diversify our bilingual and multilingual educator workforce. We know only 24% of teacher preparation programs include program literacy coursework that adequately addresses strategies to teach English learner students. And only half of the states require a specific bilingual certification or endorsement for educators who teach English to English learners. The department is really working hard and continuing to make investments, provide funding opportunities for evidence-based state and local programs such as teacher residencies, grow your own, and apprenticeships, hoping to expand the educator workforce, as well as elevate effective programs so that we can disseminate information and share that with the field and continue again to hopefully scale up and replicate the types of programs that we know will help us better prepare our workforce, our current workforce, and then perhaps recruit a more diversified bilingual and multilingual educator workforce. And finally, our last lever is quality bilingual education for all. The Secretary's vision, again, is to create pathways to multilingualism for all. So we want to make sure that we're increasing access to high-quality language programs, that we're highlighting states that are doing a really good job in investing in these types of programs and implementing evidence-based practices that support students in becoming bilingual and biliterate or multilingual and multiliterate. Next slide. And so at the end of the day, it's always important that we center ourselves up. If we could go back one slide, that we center ourselves. Oh, I think I lost my Y slide. I'm sorry. I thought there was a slide in between. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about why it matters. So the slide isn't posted, but I just think it's important to stress that we know that there is a lot of research to support that being bilingual has its benefits both academically, cognitively. It also helps better prepare our students for a very competitive workforce. It increases job opportunities and job pay. And there's a lot of research to really show increases in pay. For example, there was a study done in California that demonstrated that young people who spoke more than one language were earning on average $2,200 more than their native English only peers. And in Florida, we saw a $7,700 bump in pay for people that spoke more than one language. So to support our three levers, there's our Why It Matters slide. We know that the number of English learners only continues to increase. We also know that the number of people who speak a language other than English at home has tripled in recent decades. And we know that we're very concerned about our indigenous languages that are spoken in the US and that are in huge danger of becoming extinct. So when we're thinking about language opportunities, we want to go beyond the two that are most spoken in our country, which is English and Spanish, but really think to the other languages that are spoken across our country. Again, we know multilingualism as well as bilingualism has huge positive impacts on students.
And Melissa, for those who are interested in learning more, what resources can you recommend?
So I'm always excited to share that we have a huge repository of resources on our Incella website. And so you can see that QR code on the slide here. We house over 57,000 resources that support efforts around being bilingual, and that includes fact sheets, infographics, research, webinars, and a bunch of other things. But I'm really especially excited to share that we recently released our English Learner Family Toolkit, which you can find on the Incella webpage. And this toolkit is really designed to help our families and our educators stay connected with the latest tips and tools and practical resources to support families and students navigate the US system, starting with enrollment into the system. And we've also developed an app for this particular toolkit, which can be used on an Android and an iPhone. And I'm happy to share that it also comes in Spanish, Chinese, and Arabic. And we're looking to release it in Portuguese very soon, as well as Vietnamese. So we want to here at the department model and exemplify what it means to ensure that families and students have access in a language that they understand, as well as model just the importance of being multilingual in a globally competitive society.
Well, thank you, Melissa. And for just a reminder to our attendees, all the resources shared and posted in the chat are going to be sent in a follow-up email by CGLR. So great to hear what's happening at the federal level. And Anya, I want to turn to you. And before we dig in, I'd love for, if you could provide some context for what Sobrato Early Academic Language is, and if you can give us a background on what the P3 framework is and how it came to be.
Great. Thank you, Carla. And it truly is an honor to be a part of this panel and to join the Campaign for Grade Level Reading community once again. SEAL is a research and evidence-based approach to joyful, rigorous, equity-focused education. We do this work because we believe in the cultural, linguistic, intellectual brilliance of our country's diverse children. And we deeply understand that our schools were not adequately designed to serve these diverse children. Yet, we know that when schooling builds upon the assets, the lived experiences, the funds of knowledge, honoring family and community cultures, and developing home languages, children thrive. Even though this is widely agreed upon research-wise and more generally across the education sector, it flies in the face of what children experience each and every day. At SEAL, we work to make asset-based, engaging, joyful, rich learning a real experience for children, families, and school communities. And we work to move English learner children from the margins to the center of our approaches, policies, and practices. We focus our work on the ground in California. We began as a pilot in 2008, building a comprehensive preschool through third grade model. After strong results from an external evaluation, we began replicating the model in 2013. In 2019, we became an independent nonprofit to scale our impact even farther. So I am thrilled to be here today to share our new P3 framework, which is built upon our work on the ground over the last 15 years. This framework aims to help the field more fully center multilingual learner, English learner students. I am so excited to leverage the framework in the context of our focus on kindergarten as a sturdy bridge between early learning and the early grades. And a very special shout out to Dr. Lori Olson, who is in the audience and authored this framework. And Lori is also the founder and now strategic advisor to SEAL. So glad to have you here today, Lori. So we decided to create this framework because existing P3 frameworks and initiatives speak to systems issues, but are inadequate in addressing English learners. And though English learners are a significant and growing population, especially in California, but also across our nation, they are still largely marginalized, given lip service and a light touch. The expertise that does exist in our systems and programs is siloed. Furthermore, we find that much of the existing P3 work isn't sufficiently impacting instruction, teaching and learning, the heart of schooling. Systems need to support, sustain, invigorate what actually happens in the classroom on the ground, the instruction. So this tool is designed to help statewide and local P3 efforts more fully center our greatest asset, our beautifully diverse children, and to reach the classroom, the lived experiences of children and families. The P3 systems that we imagine and believe are possible are asset-oriented, committed to full access of all content areas. They center English learners in coherent system of shared responsibility and build strong partnerships with families and communities. These systems provide research-based, joyful, culturally and linguistically responsive instruction and language development programs and pathways across the P3 continuum. So a note about terms, you will hear me use multiple terms. In early learning, we use dual language learner or DLL. In K-12, the federal designation is English learner. And in California, we're increasingly using multilingual learner. Other places are now using emergent bilingual as well. I will be using them interchangeably, all to describe children who speak another language other than English at home. So our systems and expertise are deeply siloed, both the early learning systems and expertise with the K-12, but also systems and expertise focused on English learners. Yet we need to build systems that are knit together, where expertise is infused throughout, where there is a shared commitment across all, and where there's alignment and articulation across practices, programs, and pathways. There are 8 key understandings that ground this framework. Development of language is a critical component of ages 0 to 8. As such, for English learner multilingual children, preschool through 3rd grade are essential years. All young children have the capacity to learn multiple languages, yet language access and therefore language development depends on appropriate supports and instruction. Full proficiency in a second language takes time, 5 to 7 years. And though bilingualism is an asset for all, it is a necessity and equity issue for English learners. Languages are not treated all equal, so we must address issues of unequal language status and affirm cultural and linguistic diversity as powerful assets. Furthermore, there is a long history of exclusion and inequity that must also be recognized and dismantled. We are still operating within systems that were built in deeply inequitable ways. These 11 principles are really design principles intended to help us dismantle and rebuild what we know children need and deserve. This work to dismantle and to redesign is essential. Each and every day, our English learners experience tremendous language loss. When a kindergartner walks into school for the first time and they are told to leave their language and culture at the door, either implicitly or explicitly, language loss begins immediately. When we have not adequately redesigned our classrooms, schools, and systems in asset-based ways, that child will very likely begin responding to their own family members in English within days. A young child learns quickly and will deeply understand unequal language status. So these principles are the components that must thread across our classrooms and schools. Otherwise, that language loss and its broader impacts will remain the status quo. There is a long history of systems and practices, and if we do not do the work to dismantle, undo, unlearn, and then redesign and rebuild, we will continue to see what the status quo, what we see. So enacting the vision of inclusive, equitable, responsive education for our youngest English learners requires a coherent system grounded in strong, research-based pedagogy. In such a system, all components are focused on supporting high-quality, joyful learning, and the integration of language, literacy, and content is key to this. Language-rich pedagogy and literacy development should occur throughout the curriculum. This is accomplished through thematic instruction that integrates content, for example, science and social studies content, with language and literacy. Intentionally planned infusion of oral language and early literacy skills within the study of content. These approaches give the content context for language and literacy development and builds the background knowledge that is so essential for literacy. This kind of approach provides the connection that English learners need to strengthen comprehension and literacy engagement with grade-level academic content. Language and literacy develop in the context of learning and constructing knowledge. So let's take a look at what that looks like in action. So complex academic language and literacy development. The world can be named in ever more precise ways. And then children are given hands-on opportunities to play and to use that language. The amplification of language, that we can start simple and build to amplify our language, our ideas, and our knowledge. Oral interaction is so critical. We need our kiddos using language all the time, and they must have ongoing structured conversations with their peers connected to rich content that they are excited about and deeply engaged in. Authentic writing that has purpose and focus, where they can develop their voice and express themselves and share their knowledge that they've acquired. And that begins with dictation. Play, hands-on dramatic play that is connected to the content, where they can use their imagination, express themselves, and develop their language, and begin to imagine themselves in the world. We see a direct connection between dramatic play to hands-on inquiry-based learning like research centers. That is the integration of language. That is what the integration of language, early literacy, and content looks like. This requires an instructional vision that is not siloed, where early literacy is happening in total isolation from interesting content. Ideally, children are able to apply those early foundational skills that they are learning directly into meaningful, knowledge-based learning activities. That is the joyful kind of learning we know our children need and deserve. An inclusive, equitable, and responsive P3 system for English learners requires a focus on these core components of our system: instruction, curriculum, program, workforce, funding and resources, assessment and accountability, governance, and very importantly, family and community. Our framework document unpacks each of these components, and there's a tool at the end that illustrates what each of these components can look like at both the state and local levels. It is our hope that leaders will use the framework to reflect on their systems and practices, and that it can be a tool for learning, planning, and implementing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anya, for sharing what it looks like for a system to really be responsive to the teaching and learning needs of our multilingual students. And Chantella, I'd love to invite you into the conversation and share a little bit more about the Children's Equity Project and why your focus on bilingual education, why you feel like that focus on dual language instruction is so important.
Yeah, thank you. I'm thrilled to be here and honored to be sitting alongside virtually all of my colleagues who are working hard in the field in different spaces. So I lead the Children's Equity Project at Arizona State University. For folks who might not be aware, we are a center that's focused on child policy issues in really all of the systems that impact young kids and families. We do a lot of our work in early care and education because of my background and my training and my previous work. But we also do work in all of the other systems that impact kids and families, including a lot of work in K-12, mental health, child welfare, immigration, so on and so forth. We do work across research, policy, and practice, but policy is really at the very heart of what we do. And of course, the overarching mission and goal of the Children's Equity Project is really to advance equity in the systems that serve kids and families. And we do that through many different levers. If you go to the next slide, before I jump into kind of the benefits of bilingualism, just to kind of answer your question, I think there's a number of key reasons why kind of dual language education, language rights for dual language learners and ELs and so forth are such a central issue and have always been for the Children's Equity Project since we started about 5 years ago. I'm going to go over a few slides on kind of the research and what the research says about bilingualism, about what the research says about dual language education for ELs in particular. But I think the first piece to just name, and I appreciate the fact that other folks on the panel have already mentioned civil rights, because I think that's the first one, right? So there's bilingualism is amazing for lots of reasons I'll talk about in a second. Dual language education is a really important vehicle to get us there. But I think first and foremost, right, civil rights and the right that children have in this country to equal education opportunity has to be front and center, right? Because if we say that every kid has to have an equal education or equal education opportunities, but then we insist that it's in one language, when we know a lot of kids in this country, right, speak a different language at home, in addition to or instead of English, then by default and on purpose, right, we are disadvantaging an entire group of kids before they even walk in the door. So really ensuring, I think dual language education is an issue of equity and civil rights for us, because if we don't provide that dual language education, again, we're baking in that disadvantage from the start. And I think that's really important to note. I think that a lot of our kids who are dual language learners or English learners in the United States are already marginalized by other systems, right? Their families are marginalized by lots of systems, as we know. And bilingualism and multilingualism is such an amazing strength, right? Again, that I'll talk about more in a second. But when we kind of look at this strength and don't foster it and instead kind of shut it out by really focusing only on English, of course, that language, as Anya mentioned, that language loss begins to happen quickly, right? Then it is a profound inequity, again, that we are doing on purpose as a matter of policy and rules and procedures, right? And so that is a reason, and that is a main reason why dual language education, a focus on dual language learners, is really one of the core and heart issues at the Children's Equity Project. I'll also say I'm Mexican American. I grew up bilingual. I'm raising my 2 young kids bilingual. We speak English and Spanish, and both of my kids are in dual language, or the younger one, Spanish immersion program. So we believe deeply in this, and it really goes through and through. So really briefly on the science of bilingualism, this is something that most folks are probably already familiar with. But we know, if you go to the previous slide, that bilingualism is associated with a whole number of different outcomes. There's been lots of research that has found that it is associated with cognitive development, with problem solving and executive functions, and attention shifting and flexible thinking, and a whole lot of other concepts that are critical to learning and to doing well in school, right? And to social development and so on and so forth. We know, if you go to the next slide, let's go one more, that there's a whole lot of education. I'll kind of share this one slide. This graph is from the Center for the Developing Child at Harvard that they published quite a few years ago now. But it really makes the point that if we look at language, right, that navy blue bar, and look at when it peaks, right, like we see a really sharp slope and peak in early childhood. And then it starts to come down over the course of time, right? In the United States, so much of our kind of second language learning for all children happens in way later grades, right? Middle school, high school, and so on. And for our English learners and our dual language learners, right, who aren't getting these early opportunities, look at that phase, right, that period of time in early childhood, which includes kindergarten, right, and the early grades, and how we can really optimize that period of brain development where the brain is wide open to learn as many languages as we can expose it to, and especially that home language that is connected to children's identity, to children's families, to children's culture, to all these other pieces. So if we go to the next slide, there's also, of course, research on dual language education. And as Anya mentioned, so often we kind of tinker around the edges and don't get at the core of instruction, right? And so part of what we focus on is really looking at the language of instruction, right? And really ensuring and pushing for, right, dual language education, where language and education is provided in all the languages that kids speak, ideally, and alongside English, right? Because we know that lots of research has shown that when we do that, ELs who have access to dual language education, they become proficient in English more quickly, they outperform their peers in other subject areas, they reach academic norms, they exit, right, EL designation or status faster, and then of course they become biliterate. Melissa earlier talked about some of those economic studies and earnings that we see later on, and that's not surprising because we're in such a global economy, right? And so there's lots of reasons for that. If we go to the next slide, there's also this other piece that I kind of alluded to a minute ago, right? But when we think about kindergarten, when we think about the early grades, right, and that transition from early childhood to K and the early grades, right, that relationship with families is so important. And so often it just kind of gets lip service and isn't really kind of authentic and a true and deep partnership, right? Language and having a dual language program and speaking the same language that families speak at home, or having someone who is able to do that, it just makes the relationship easier, right? It's not in itself sufficient, but it does give us a head start in building those relationships with families and ensuring that families are a part and really meaningfully included and partners in the education of their children at home, and so on and so forth. I think the other piece to really think about, my daughter's in kindergarten, and it has been a transition, a big transition, right? But I think part of what we don't talk about enough in dual language education is the sense of belonging that kids might feel, right? If you imagine anybody at your age, right, at our age as adults walking into a setting where nobody speaks the language that you speak, everybody's speaking somewhere else. Now imagine you're 5 and it's a new school and it's a new teacher and it's a whole new set of peers, right? And it's a new environment. And there's lots of bigger kids around this school than there were in your preschool, right? And now think about what that might look like if there are, the teacher does speak the language that your family speaks, and some of the peers do, and the instruction that's actually taught, right? And there's books that you might recognize. And there's songs that are sung that you might recognize, right? And there's this added inherent piece of belonging, of just like identity and self-esteem, right? That is baked into that as a start, again, inadequate on its own, but really gives us a head start on that big transition that little kids go through between the early childhood and the K space and moving up. Next slide. So I don't have a ton of time left, I think, but just to really hone in on this particular population, because again, we think that DLs and ELs, similar to what Anya mentioned earlier, they have to be centered, right? They have to be the core part of the conversation. And if, as we expand access to dual language education, we need to make sure that we're doing that equitably by centering these kids. And so here is just a summary of some of the studies that have found that ELs who receive high quality instruction in their home language alongside English outperform their peers, as I mentioned earlier. We know if we go, ELs who attend a dual language program in preschool or K are more likely to be proficient in English by middle school. Many ELs who do attend a Spanish English, this research study was specifically done on Spanish English, dual language immersion in elementary, continue taking advanced placement Spanish classes in high school, giving them really a jump start, as we all know, in college credits and beyond. We go to the next slide. We also know that when this doesn't happen, right, too often there is segregation of English learners in school settings, and in many districts by design as a matter of policy, right? Like you're pulled out and for part of the day, for much of the day. In Arizona, it used to be for 4 hours, and that was recently changed and rolled back to a shorter amount of time. But still, using national achievement data, researchers have found that the degree of segregation between English learners and their peers was actually the greatest predictor of disparities in achievement between ELs and non-ELs, right? Segregated settings is associated with less access to grade level content. As I mentioned, Arizona used to have a 4-hour requirement for structured English immersion, segregated, ELs segregated from their peers. And when you start to think about the school day, 6.5, 7 hours, something like that, take away 4 of them, and then you add in lunch and recess and transitions and everything else that happens during the school day, right? There's just less, there's like physically less time, right, for math and science and social studies and all of the other really important content that students need to be getting consistently over the course of their educational trajectories to stay on track. If we go to the next slide. I'll just point folks to this National Academy study. Of course, the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine published a report on English learners specifically. I think it was back in 2017 that goes into depth on all of the research and evidence on best practices and really does, again, highlight dual language education as an important model. This particular study that is on this slide was published just last year in May. And in the recommendations from this report, the committee really came up with a number of high quality indicators for elementary education that should be aligned with the early years, and bilingual education for DLs and for ELs was one core piece of that. Next slide. And so finally, I think I'm going to end on this slide, right? We have lots of data. We have all the data and research on the benefits of bilingualism and how it's so great. We know that ELs and DLs are bringing this gift from home, right? Like they're speaking it at home. It's part of who they are. It's part of their cultures. Instead of kind of aligning with that research and with that science, right? We're kind of doing the opposite, where in this nation, about 92% of ELs are not in dual language programs, right? And so when we think about the education space and how practice aligns or doesn't align with what research says, this is one of the most profound misalignments that we see in that space. So if we go to the next slide, I think that's it for me.
Thank you, Chantal, for just the importance of grounding us in the research and adding to that federal and systems perspective that we heard earlier. And I want to now transition us to Lydia, who can share a bit about when the rubber really meets the road, and have us talk a little bit about what this looks like for implementing the framework, for example, at the district level, and just your experience at LA Unified.
Thank you so much. I first want to begin with how we can have a dream around this work and what the experience is like for our families, even before we get into the actual framework and the classroom experience. There comes a time and a moment when a student, a child, a little one, someone's tesoro, shows up at a school with their parents, or the parents show up on their own, saying, I'd like to enroll at this school. And my dream would be that in our country, from that moment of first touch of enrollment, when we're giving them the packets of everything to fill out, including the home language survey, that the parent is congratulated for having another language at home. I imagine this looking like, hi, welcome to our school. Parent is speaking in another language. This is so wonderful. It looks like you speak another language other than English. This is amazing. You're going to fill out this one little piece of paper on the home language survey. And the wonderful thing is that when you share the other language that you speak, our school offers an opportunity for your child to receive bilingual recognition, bilingual awards. That's the conversation that should happen when a child first enrolls. The flip of what starts to happen is they come and complete an enrollment packet, and the story becomes very compliance driven. And I understand why. There's a purpose for that. You filled out another language other than English. You're going to have to take an initial exam to determine your English proficiency. And it all becomes about English proficiency, which is valid and important and critical. But from the moment that conversation begins, we have just denied the culture, the identity, and the language, the history, the ancestral wisdom of all of those experiences at home. So how do you change from that moment, that feeling that does not unearth joy, that does not unearth love, that already makes a family feel there's something wrong with me and I am not enough, including the child? How you do that is with this P3 framework. How you do that is also by creating additional other systems to celebrate who a child and their family is. So one thing that we've done with the Seal of Biliteracy is we don't wait until 12th grade. And yes, we've had 5th grade and 8th grade pathway awards, but we became very intentional about what are we going to do for students who are in dual language programs and students who don't have that opportunity in sheltered English learner programs, to know that what they come with from home is going to be validated and is important. So we are going to start with recognition, biliteracy pathway awards from the age of 4, 5, 6, UTK, K1. We're going to throw 3rd grade in there to build that all the way through. So it's constantly validated versus it's only about English proficiency. Important, but it's not the whole piece of the humanity. And when we enroll children and families, we are enrolling humans, not numbers, not a language classification, English only, EL, RFEP, reclassified, all terms that I struggle with. I prefer emergent, bilingual, multilingual learners, asset space. So I'm putting that on the table for everyone to think about. What is your role in everything that we do from the moment a child comes in to our public education system? Because then when that child walks into the campus, to the cafeteria, to get their breakfast, to meeting with the supervision aides, to meeting with people in the office and walking through the campus, all of those spaces are validated from their indigenous language, if it's Quiche. Tell me more. I want to hear you speak in your home language. Teach me your home language. A few phrases. That's all supposed to happen and should be happening right before they walk in to meet their teachers. And if we're implementing this P3 framework, it all aligns. So in LA Unified, we've taken steps. Just going to give you a little data on it. Before we implemented the K, TK, and 1st grade awards, we had approximately about 1,500 kids getting pathway awards prior to last year. When we added these additional grades and had our families be aware of how valued the home language is, or even families who want to learn another language other than English, right? so that they can be a part of their community. I have many Spanish speaking home language speakers who are in Arabic dual language programs because they want to be multilingual. I mean, talk about the beauty of wanting to be in this multilingual, generational global city of Los Angeles, that you're valuing everyone. And I'd like to tell you that last year by June, we were able to issue 20,000 awards with criteria where teachers and families said, I want to go for this and value language. So building those systems along the way to support what should be happening in instruction, which with the P3 framework around all of these issues are essential. Because once we get beyond third grade, fourth and fifth, and you raise your hand if you've got a teenager and they have a lot of different interests by the time they're 11 and 12, and they want to explore a lot of different areas, which they should, then we've laid a foundation of language, multilingualism, of their community and or of their home that they're going to take into all their other interests, be it a sports interest, a dance interest, an engineering interest. It's already there as a foundational piece, not as I need to take a language course to meet requirements to go to college. So it's being added in high school. Nothing wrong with that. It's nice to have that, but it sure is powerful when we start from the earliest age with the language identity of all our students, but especially our emerging bilinguals, greeting them with, wow, we're so glad you enrolled. You're going to be one of our emerging bilinguals. You've got this beautiful home language. We're going to help you be bilingual in English. And then you're going to have the opportunity maybe in high school, if you want to take French or German or continue with Spanish. This is the language identity piece that I keep talking about. And this is where policy matters, because there's nothing in our state ed code or in federal law that prevents us from doing some of these things to build stronger systems. So think about what your home language survey, how it's presented. Think about the letters you send home to your English learner, emergent bilingual families. Do they say welcome? Do they say congratulations? We're so happy you have another home language. No, they generally start with well, we're going to be giving you a test so that you can become more English proficient and you receive English services. Not saying that's not important. It's essential as well. But we're missing the human piece of it. So I've been fortunate to be working with SEAL. I've been fortunate to be in this role for 5 years, where we have approximately 230 dual language programs. We have them in 7 languages. We've provided, and every year we increase in our numbers of SEAL of Biliteracy. We're at 6,700 students receiving them. And those are all great data numbers, but in the end is, what are we feeling in here, right? I have a dream, and what's it creating in this mind-heart connection over the identity and then the intersectionality spaces that our children are living for the future. So that's like my my spiel on all of these pieces, and also my spiel to get into talking about beyond the reclassification piece on all of this. And I'm so sorry I did not create slides on any of this. I'm sure I have a million. I just have to look for all of this, but this is how we try to put all of these pieces together. I will say you do need essential partners in this work. I've been very fortunate to be able to have very nurturing conversations with people in this arena, from Anya to Lori Olson to Magali, to also having tough conversations. We don't limit it to like, oh, this is all beautiful and tied up in a bow. What does this actually mean for students and their families in terms of outcomes? But I hope some of this that I shared allows you to start thinking about ways to go beyond the legal obligation to the heart obligation, the joy obligation, for the full human experience. That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia, for really centering the importance of culturally and linguistically affirming practices. And I want to just actually stay on the topic of practice and jump on a little bit of a dialogue amongst you all. And want to invite whoever wants to speak up. Curious how you see teachers play a role in really implementing what we're talking about and what types of supports they need.
Well, I'm happy to jump in. One of those 11 design principles that we highlight in the framework talks about teacher agency. And we highlight that because the work that we see happening, what we're describing, what Lydia is describing in terms of treating young people and families as humans, seeing who they are. This is not cookie cutter. This is not reading a script. This is not something that teachers can do individually. They need to be working in collaboration, but they also need to have agency in their work, in the sense that they need the skills, the capacities, and the space, the professional time to be able to enact this kind of vision that we have. I think we're hearing hearts and minds. We're talking about values and beliefs, and then we're talking about expertise and pedagogy. And this is complex work, and we're looking to create equity-driven schools and classrooms, and that's complex work, right? We are taking on some of the deepest ills of our society and a long, long history of how the unequal treatment and understanding of language particularly across racial lines. And we know you cannot separate race and language, right? Those are interrelated, and how some languages have been treated versus others. There's long, long history here. So in order to do that, teachers really do need to be empowered. This is hard work. They need to be supported, and they cannot do it alone. They need to do it in collaboration with colleagues, and they need to do it with support of their leaders, their site leaders, their district leaders. There needs to be a shared understanding. And I see some incredible things coming in both the Q&A and the chat about some of the challenges that some of you all are facing in the real context within which you operate. And we don't want to minimize those, because it's real. The work that we're doing here is socio-political work. It is not just a single faceted set of approaches. So these are real contexts. And so just in terms of that teacher piece, I think it's important for all of us to be holding that. There is no silver bullet. There is no one curriculum, one PD, and one investment is not enough either. We need ongoing, sustained. It needs to be both supplemental funds and ongoing, every day, every year, core funding, in order to bring forth the kind of systems, the investment that LA has made in their Pathways program. And I just want to reiterate, Lydia said it, but it starts in preschool, and then again at kindergarten, and then again at third grade, and then again at the end of elementary, and then again in middle school. It is about, again, really building that systems approach. This isn't one-time work.
If I could add to that, when I think about LA Unified, of course, I feel very fortunate. We have an amazing superintendent, an amazing deputy chief who supports the movement of all this work. It begins with aligning with your HR partners, your human resources partners in your district. It begins with talking about how do we actually increase pay. And we have done that in LA Unified. For teachers who hold a bilingual authorization, they get an additional stipend. For our teachers who come into the system and want to become bilingual teachers, we actually have an internal training system through our district internship program. We're also aligned with HR by ensuring that we come in and do new teacher training to begin, right? Just the beginning pieces. But it doesn't stop. It is continually ongoing. And the reason we're shifting a lot of the work we do in the multilingual, multicultural education department is I'm trying to live more in the space of the planning world and creating resources and putting things together where we help teachers sit down and go, let's think about this. Where does active listening and academic language, and what does the curriculum we've been provided, right? Because everybody has different curriculums everywhere. When we sit together and plan for all of these needs, the variety of language, cultural, academic, social, emotional needs, where do we move all these pieces around? How are we intentional in creating those opportunities for discussion? I would love to say it's one and done, but it's ever evolving also as we learn more and get more research. And this is where the partnerships really help us, because we have the partnership with SEAL. It has helped strengthen some very essential key practices. It has helped us also learn what has or has not worked for some of our educators and what we need to continue to move forward. So it doesn't just live in your instruction box. It lives in your HR box. It lives in how you communicate with your senior leaders and your superintendents. It lives in principal understanding of all of these pieces. And then it lives as, of course, reconnecting to the human piece and then the compliance pieces that are part of that. So it is a very holistic, systematic approach that you have to constantly be checking in multiple ways for our teachers to be able to do and provide the service that I believe in their hearts they want to provide for our kids.
So do you want to jump in, or from the federal perspective, and Chantel also from the research perspective?
Yeah, so I do. I think, as moving to the federal level certainly brings a completely different lens to some of my perspective and what I see as the other pieces that we need to consider as we're thinking about teachers and students and going beyond this compliance piece. But the big thing, I think, is that we really need to look at the whole ecosystem. I think we need to be reminded, and we need to remind others that teachers are really key and play a key role in really producing and fostering young individuals that then we want to become productive members of a greater society, right? And what we've kind of had more conversations around here at the federal level, because we know there's such a challenge in teacher pay and teacher resources and materials, and is that we really need to start kind of emphasizing the fact that multilingualism is really an economic imperative, and that we want to go beyond just our school system and really reach out to workforce in particular to really help us on our journey to educate and prepare young people to then again function in different ways in a larger, more global society. I think, as Anya mentioned, the use of terms, English learner versus multilingual learner, and there's been a lot of talk of moving from deficit-based language to asset-based language. And I think for us, it's really ensuring that we're very clear on who our students are and what our responsibilities are in serving them. And then how do we lean in and leverage the opportunity that young people who come to school with different languages and cultures afford us to then create that pathway to multilingualism, to meet a huge demand in societal competencies, but also in the workforce. We know that there is probably no particular position in industry that doesn't require communication with people that speak a language other than English. And we need to take advantage of that as educators. And we need to connect with, industry in our community. We need to connect with industry leaders that are saying they need young people to do X. We need to ask them to share the responsibility with us to invest in the work that we are doing so that we can meet our needs to better prepare teachers, to provide the resources that are necessary for our students, and to elevate the fact that coming to school with a language other than English is actually something of value that we should respect, that we should wrap our arms around, and really think about leveraging. Our hands oftentimes are very tied. I've worked at the site level, at the district level, at the state level, and now at the federal level. And I've worked with schools in Arizona as well as outside of Arizona. And there is one thing that we know for sure. We are always going to be challenged with funding what needs to be funded in education. So what we want to do is think outside of the traditional box of approaches to addressing that barrier, and really look to others within our ecosystem that, just like us, should share the responsibility of educating our future, which includes English learners, and really at a time where we can actually, where we have elevated English learners.
I'm going to transition us to a little bit of a Q&A, and I'm going to try to combine some of the questions that I'm seeing. And one of the ones that's coming up is this idea around kinder readiness, and what kind of the structures that right now we have in place to measure proficiency, and like, what does it mean to, you know, meet certain academic standards, and, you know, how we think about assessment and accountability. So I'm curious, like, in the context of kindergarten readiness and how we think of accountability, what are the sort of things that you would uplift for our emerging bilingual students, our DLLs, in that frame?
Well, I'll just jump in and say, I think first and foremost, we need to acknowledge that most of our tools and resources are not linguistically and culturally valid. And so not to say that we therefore ignore kinder readiness and some of the movements of the field, and that it is something to be thought of, but that not that we should ignore, you know, by any means, assessment and the gathering of data. But we also need to be very realistic, because I think as many of us have talked about, and Chantel was pointing at earlier as well, if we are hyper-focused only on English, there's harm done immediately. And there's also one thing to uplift is, particularly if you are operating a dual language program and all you're doing is focusing on data that is English focused, you are going to undo your program, like hands down, because that's not your literacy model, and you're not collecting data, or your language model, you're not collecting data across the board. You are not adequately showing what children know and are able to do. And so there's a lot, you know, I think within the field, we need to definitely be eyes wide open, and then continue to push for ever more culturally and linguistically valid resources. And I think then in each of our roles, we need to help manage up and down, because though we may know this, our bosses and the leaders around us, our peers, and also the other people in the community who are looking often at the data that's available, which is almost entirely English dominant, they are interpreting and saying things like children can't read, and we need to be clear about really what does this data tell us. And it may be that it doesn't tell us everything, and we don't have the other data, you know, but we need to navigate those waters pretty carefully. I also want to say that I heard a beautiful work being done in Minnesota about the reframe on readiness. Children are all ready. Children are not ready, right? Children are ready. Is the system ready to welcome them as they come in? And so there's a shift there as well. And I just wanted to add that there is work that can be found from the Department of Ed in Minnesota that they're doing great work on their own website, and to try to reframe that picture.
That's what I was gonna start with. I think when we think about school readiness, it is, what is the measure? Like, how are we measuring the school, right? Should be a measure, an assessment of the environment that the kids are going into, and that is kindergarten readiness, right? That is school readiness. I think if we could talk about an assets-based approach all day, but if we continue with this frame of like measuring whether you're ready or not, some are ready, some are not by this like arbitrary set of indicators, I think it automatically starts us off on a deficit frame, as opposed to what Anya just mentioned, right? That like kids are born ready. Kids are like born ready to learn. Kids are born curious. Kids are born excited to learn, right? If you've been around a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old, right, going on up, like they don't stop asking questions. They just evolve and get more complicated. They move, they don't stop moving because they're exploring. Like, I think this idea of kids are born natural scientists and eager to learn and inquire. And like, again, what is the measure of the school being ready for that, right? And to not squander that, but to like help flourish and grow that in a way that for all kids, right? And I appreciate the framing of the question in the chat was some along these lines, right? Because when we say school readiness means you have to come in knowing English or you have to come in blah, blah, blah. Again, starting off as a deficit focus, starting off with this narrow view, starting off, right, with in just a place that is not going to get us to all kids thriving. So.
You know, I think something that is important just to kind of bring up, not necessarily go into deep conversation about, with the readiness piece and the appropriate assessment piece, which again is they're really valid concerns and areas that we need to consider, and something that we are thinking about in terms of you know, assessment and what does that mean in support of the field. And if we really want you know, to kind of to meet our vision around multilingualism, then of course we have to think about that, because to get an accurate gauge of where our students are and the wonderful things that they can already do is critical in moving this work forward. But I think something that we've also prioritized and that we're thinking a lot about, especially in the early grades and this work around early school success, is chronic absenteeism. That, you know, we also want to give kids a reason to come to school and to be, and I loved everything Lydia said in terms of the welcoming environment and really looking beyond, you know, just compliance and really, or looking at compliance as an opportunity that opens the door, right? That we actually get to identify the language that students come to school with, that they're experiencing at home, and that is going to be a huge opportunity in school. But we have to get them there. You know, we keep seeing that, you know, the percentage of chronic absenteeism is largely in our early grades, and we know there's so many complexities around that. And I think that that's where, again, we look to the ecosystem, that we have to think about how are we not only addressing students in our classrooms, but how are we acknowledging and addressing their family unit, you know, the wonderful people that they go home to every day, that ensure that they come to school. And I think that's where our English Learner Family Toolkit is really helpful, that we know that navigating our system of education is a difficult one, even for those of us that are in the center of it. So what does that mean for families that come with different views and ideas and beliefs of what that system is supposed to be, what it's supposed to feel like and look like, and how do we ensure that all of these efforts that we know that we need to do a better job at actually pay off, because kids are in school and they're benefiting from that.
And I'll add, because I did see that there are some folks who wear some of the community schools hats in our audience, and just really thinking about this intersection of community schools and of what we try to create schools as a hub, as a place for the community, for the whole family, and the connection between language and the connection between what children are doing in the classroom, and really working to not see community schools just as the wraparound services, but really connected to the core of what children are also learning, what teachers are doing, and having shared frameworks across. And we know that language is such a critical tool. You know, when we create inclusive language spaces, we are building community, right? We are welcoming community. And so really thinking about, again, from the youngest ages, and not that it doesn't matter for the upper ages. I also saw some comments and questions about middle school and high school, and we know it's all critical. Our littles are so aware, and the harm that gets done immediately, their desire to Melissa's point, to want to come to school, to feel represented in school. And this is work, I do want to say, the work on workforce is critical. We know it across the board. We know that our kids thrive when their teachers and their school community, the staff, you know, all the way up from the superintendent down to, you know, the folks who are behind the scenes helping the school run, when they represent the communities of the children, you know, they're going to thrive. Right. And so it is really about what are we doing with recruiting and building really diverse racially and linguistically, culturally workforce. And this is work that everybody does. This is not just for, you know, folks who are bilingual themselves or multilingual themselves. This is not just for, you know, certain teachers. This is work that we all do together, and we show and we model for our children what that looks like. And so that, and again, kids feel that immediately, you know, their sensors and their ability to be able to sense, is this an inclusive community? You know, does this community care about every child or certain children? It is absolutely amazing what a 3, 4, 5-year-old picks up, right? Because they're wired to be learning socially, to be picking up on all these pieces. So the work, I wanted to also add, because we focus, and of course it's critical to focus on the economic benefits and the professional benefits of multilingualism. And this is a tool of pluralism. If we believe in a pluralistic society, if we have that vision, this is such an actionable way in terms of how do you build those communities within our schools? How are we anchoring that and growing and helping our children grow in, you know, in this most important community outside of their home and their family community? And so I just wanted to add that piece as well.
Thank you, Anya. And just a reminder for folks to please take a moment to answer the survey that was linked in the chat and launched in the Zoom. And I'm going to try to combine a couple of questions here for our last few minutes together. There's an element of building up demand for this work from the ground up, from families, from teachers in the classroom. And I'm curious how you've seen that play out, or how you would support that. Given the complexity of this work, I know we hinted at all of the different terminology, and like how to do that in a way that's responsive to all of the nuances of this student population.
I'll just speak from a district perspective. Because of all the multiple pieces, you have to be an advocate, but you have to also be very astute at learning from the outside, guiding the internal discussions, and moving some of these pieces forward. Where can they live in policy to enact certain work moving forward? And what else can be added outside of policy to ensure the human and the heart connection piece? It's a constant balance of going back and forth. Like I said, I started with the whole dream piece, because if you can't think beyond what you're being dictated to do as a minimum, because everything that we receive as a dictation of doing in ed code, you know, federal guidelines, state guidelines, to me, that's the minimum. So you have to understand what that minimum is and then think beyond that and internally meet and brainstorm and listen externally to your community partners, listen to your families, listen to your students who have had certain kinds of experiences and who can tell you, like when I talk to high school kids and they're telling me about what it was like in that student agency piece, and then setting up systems and structures for those multiple spaces of dialogue to be able to move it forward. Otherwise, what you will do is the minimum, and the minimum only gets you the minimum level of academic excellence, which is generally, down here. The minimum only gets you some kiddos going, okay, I finished school, got it, everything, but did I feel loved? Did I feel validated? Did I feel connected around my identity? And I would add to this, all this that we're talking about, if we were to able to get this right in so many spaces, whatever we define as right, because that's ever evolving as well. I anticipate that the social emotional learning needs and the requirements of that journey would lessen just a little bit in terms of all of those supports that we push into when the trauma and the crisis is like, whoo, there it is. Going back to attendance, if we're able to get things a little sooner. And I love the attendance piece because, again, I feel fortunate in our district that what we're doing is going beyond what a policy is telling us to increase attendance. Literally, our superintendents, our leaders, myself and others are visiting homes, are building relationships. It's not like, oh, why aren't you in school? It's like, we're here. Talk to us. Let us know what's going on for you. What can we do? And get that community space going is beyond this device. It's beyond Instagram. It's beyond all of this. And it's the one-on-one connection that we have with them. So managing all of those pieces, I have no idea how you do it at the federal level. But I feel fortunate in LA that I feel like we're constantly moving in the right direction. And the partnerships again, partnerships.
I just want to, I think it would be interesting to, like most other countries around the world, if our minimum was teaching 2, 3, or 4 languages, which is the case in many countries across the globe, right? And I think we need to make it just a norm that this is just how we teach, right? And to Lydia's point, that then could impact so many things. When the secretary, shared his 3 priorities, language immediately to me was very clearly a thread through all 3, right? It addresses the acceleration of learning. We know if we focus on language, we accelerate literacy development. To your point, Lydia, about the social and emotional piece, if we're acknowledging a student's language and their background and what that's tied to in their community and their experiences, we're probably going to support their mental health and well-being, right? And then, of course, those pathways to post-secondary career, college and career, again, are only going to be beneficial if you are bilingual and biliterate. And we're not even, sometimes I think talking about bilingual and again, that should be the minimum, right? We'd like to then elevate it to multilingual and multiliterate. But one of the things that I think we need to do with the creating of demand piece, Carla, that your question centered around, is that I think we need to expand our advocacy network. It's like fortunate and unfortunate. We're seeing lots of programs across the country come to fruition. Our challenge is that we're not prioritizing the right group to participate in those programs, right? So we might be seeing increases of dual language programs, but we're seeing decreases of English learners participating in those programs. And if we look closely at the research and what we know leads to effective dual language programs, we're talking about including authentic language speakers of the targeted language. So we need to help people understand that. We need to help parents who maybe don't understand that are demanding these programs in certain parts of the country. And that if they did, they would then demand that not only their child participated, but that other children participated, like English learners whose first language is Spanish, you know, that they demand that students that speak Spanish as a first language should be in the programs that their students are participating in, where they come in as English speakers, learning Spanish as a second language. So I think, you know, we need to expand our network of advocates, and we do that by increasing awareness. I believe by building knowledge and capacity around what it means and the benefits of being bilingual, what that means for children as they are developing, you know, as they're developing their brain, as they're developing socially, and all of those pieces early on. We need to talk to more people outside of our typical network of people that really in reality already agree with us and are pushing for the same things that we're pushing, and really talk to those that have leverage that we can lean into, and that I think just like us would believe and understand very clearly why this is beneficial, and more importantly, why it's critical for us as a country when it comes to ensuring that literacy becomes something that everybody has access to, and that language is key to that.
And just to add on to Melissa's comments, it can't be either or. So then you start getting into the specifics of the program. And there are certain school communities, it should be a one-way program that serve English learners. And if you are pitting then your parent population who is dominant English but want to dual against those families, you're setting yourself up. So we need to be building and investing in and helping our districts and school leaders not play an either or, but a yes and. And LA has done incredible work, including, of course, Spanish in California is the vast majority of the English learner and the multilingual community, but there are so many other languages, and LA has been every year growing and adding more languages into their repertoire. And then you hear the story of trilingual families, looking for that. So we have to be building. So one other piece I want to say is funding. We need to fund this work. It does not happen magically. And so I say that, how can we be leveraging federal, state dollars? How can we be leveraging philanthropy? I know the campaign for grade level reading community includes lots of philanthropic and folks who want to help think about and really seeing this intersectional conversation that we're having here, right? This is about equity. This is about language. It's also about culture and race, and it's about transformation. And so, seeing it all as an interconnected strategy.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to all of the panelists for just sharing your expertise and uplifting this just wonderful population of students.